Hello friends, welcome back again. We saw first 5 questions in previous video. I added video link in the description, so we continue from question 6. Question 6. What are standalone components and why Angular introduced them to reduce ng-module dependency? This is the future of Angular. Standalone components. What they are: standalone components, directives, and pipes are an Angular feature introduced to allow developers to build Angular applications with a significantly reduced or even eliminated reliance on ng modules. A standalone component manages its own dependencies directly, making it self-contained. Why Angular introduced them? Reduced ng module dependency. The primary goal is to lessen the burden and complexity associated with ng modules. Ng modules can sometimes feel like boilerplate, especially for smaller components or when organizing feature modules. Simplified authoring. Components become simpler to create, understand, and use because all their dependencies, imports, declarations, providers, are defined directly within the component's @component decorator. Improved tree shaking and bundle size. By explicitly listing dependencies, Angular's build tooling, especially with Ivy, can perform more efficient tree shaking, leading to smaller bundle sizes for production applications. Easier sharing. Standalone components are easier to share and reuse across different parts of an application, or even across different projects, as they bring their own dependencies with them. Before, every little piece of your Angular app, components, directives, had to live inside a big box called an ng module. Now, standalone components are like self-contained boxes. They bring everything they need with them, so you don't need the big parent box as much. The impact? Cleaner, more modular code, easier development, and potentially smaller app bundles. That standalone true flag is the magic switch. This is becoming the default way to generate components now. Question 7. How to implement pagination in Angular? Pagination is a common UI pattern, and they asked about implementing it in Angular. What it is? Pagination is the process of dividing a large data set into smaller, discrete pages, allowing users to navigate through the data incrementally. How to implement it? There are 2 main approaches, often combined. 1. Back-end pagination, recommended for large data sets. The front-end Angular sends parameters to the back-end API, for example, page number, page size, sort by. The back-end processes these parameters, fetches only the requested subset of data from the database, and returns it along with metadata, like total items, total pages. Angular displays this limited data and uses the metadata to render pagination controls. 2. Front-end pagination for small static datasets. Angular fetches all the data from the backend once. The component then manages the slicing and displaying of this data into pages purely in the browser. This is simpler but can be inefficient for large datasets as it requires downloading everything up front. Angular-specific implementation details. Services. Use an Angular service to encapsulate the API calls and pagination logic. For example, current page, items per page. ng4 to render the items for the current page. Custom pagination components. Create a reusable pagination component that takes current page, total pages, on-page change, and output event as inputs/outputs. RxJS. Observables can be used to manage the state of pagination. For example, using BehaviorSubject for current page changes. Libraries. Consider using third-party libraries like ngX pagination for out-of-the-box solutions. Imagine a huge library. You don't want to carry all the books at once. Back-end pagination? You tell the librarian, server, give me books 10 to 20. They bring only those. Front-end pagination. You carry all 1,000 books yourself, then only show the user books 10 to 20 at a time. Why it's important? Improves performance by reducing data transfer, enhances user experience by making large data sets navigable, and reduces memory consumption on the client side. Question 8. What is localization I18N and how translations work? Manual .xlf files, not automatic. This is essential for global apps. Localization I18N. What it is? Internationalization, often shortened to I18N because there are 18 letters between I and N, is the process of designing and developing an application in a way that makes it adaptable to different languages and cultures without requiring changes to the source code. Localization L10N is the process of adapting an internationalized application for a specific locale, language, and region. 1. How translations work in Angular usually. Mark for translation. In your templates, you mark text for translation using the I18N attribute. For example, element PI18N Hello World. You can also add descriptions and custom IDs. Extract translation files. Angular CLI provides commands, for example, ngExtract I18N, to extract all marked texts into a translation file format, commonly .xlf, XML localization file, or .json. Manual translation. These .xlf or .json files are then sent to translators. They manually translate the text into different languages. This is not automatic machine translation. Serve localized apps. When building your application for a specific language, you use Angular CLI's build command. For example, ngbuild-localize to compile separate versions of your application for each locale, embedding the correct translated strings. You're building a website for the whole world. So instead of hard-coding hello, you put a special tag that says this text needs to be translated. Then, you get a list of all these texts, give them to a human translator, and they give you back a version for Spanish, French, etc. Finally, you build a separate version of your website for each language. Why it's important? It allows your application to reach a wider audience, provides a better user experience for international users, and is crucial for global businesses. Question 9. What is CSR, client-side rendering, and how Angular can also support SSR using Angular Universal? This is about how your application gets rendered to the user. CSR, client-side rendering, versus SSR, server-side rendering with Angular Universal. CSR, client-side rendering, how it works. This is the default behavior for most single-page applications, SPAs, like typical Angular apps. When a user requests a page, the server sends a minimal HTML file, often just an empty div for the root component and all the JavaScript bundles. The browser then downloads the JavaScript, executes it, and then renders the entire UI on the client side. Your browser gets an empty canvas and a huge instruction book, JavaScript. It reads the book and draws everything itself. Pros: dynamic, interactive, faster subsequent page loads. Cons: slower initial load time, time to first contentful paint, poor for SEO, search engine optimization, because search engine crawlers might see an empty page before JS loads, can be bad for users with slow networks or devices. SSR, server-side rendering with Angular Universal. How it works. Angular Universal is a technology that allows you to run your Angular application on a server to generate static application pages. When a user requests a page, the server executes the Angular app, renders the full HTML of the requested route, and sends that complete HTML to the browser. Once the JavaScript bundles arrive and load in the browser, Angular hydrates the application, making it interactive. The server draws the whole picture first, sends it to your browser. Your browser sees the picture immediately, and then some magic happens in the background to make it clickable and interactive. Pros: excellent for SEO. Crawlers see full content immediately. Faster initial load time, time to first contentful paint. Better user experience on slow networks devices. Cons: more complex setup. Increased server load. Potentially slightly slower subsequent page loads as JS needs to rehydrate. Why it's important? Choosing between CSR and SSR depends on your application's requirements, especially regarding SEO, initial load performance, and user experience on different devices/networks. Question 10. Use of tsconfig.json, compiler options, paths, strict type checks. Finally, a foundational file for any Angular project, tsconfig.json. What it is: tsconfig.json is the configuration file for the TypeScript compiler, TSC. It specifies root files and compiler options required to compile an Angular project. Key sections and their use. Compiler options. This is the heart of tsconfig.json. It contains a vast array of settings that control how TypeScript code is compiled into JavaScript. Target specifies the JavaScript version to compile to. For example, ES 2020 for modern browsers. Module specifies the module system for the generated JavaScript. For example, ES 2020 CommonJS. Lib specifies which built-in type declaration files, d.ts, are included in the compilation. For example, DOM ES 2020. Base URL helps the compiler resolve modules relative to a base directory. Paths allows you to define module alias mappings. This is extremely useful for creating shorter, absolute import paths in your code. For example, @app core instead of ..app core. Strict, a crucial flag that enables a set of strict type-checking options like no implicit any, strict null checks, strict function types, etc. Include, exclude. Specify which files .ts should be included or excluded from the compilation process. Extends allows one tsconfig.json file to inherit configurations from another, which is common in Angular projects. For example, tsconfig.appjson extends tsconfig.json. Think of tsconfig.json as the instruction manual for your TypeScript code. It tells the TypeScript compiler things like, convert my code into modern JavaScript, look for files here, be super strict about checking for errors, and if I write @app/feature, actually look in src app/feature. Why it's important? It ensures consistent compilation behavior across your project, helps enforce coding standards, especially with strict type checks, improves developer experience with features like path aliases, and is fundamental for Angular CLI's build process. Always, always, always set strict true in your tsconfig.json. It saves you so many headaches down the line. So what's the big takeaway from all this? This interview was not just about regurgitating facts. It tested how well I could connect the dots. Angular is vast, and they touched every corner, from zone.js to lifecycle hooks, routing to change detection, and RxJS to SSR. And let's not forget the core JS fundamentals. I didn't just prepare answers. I understood why each concept exists. Why do we need track-by? Performance. Why takeUntil? To prevent memory leaks. That understanding made all the difference. It's not just about knowing the syntax, it's about knowing the architecture and the purpose. So if you're prepping for an Angular interview, my advice, don't just memorize. Understand the why. Practice with small examples. And good luck. If this video helped you out, smash that like button, subscribe for more tech insights, and let me know in the comments, what's the trickiest interview question you've ever gotten? See you in the next one.